give a fuck? Why do I give a fuck? Why do I try so hard? Why do I care so much?
Welcome to Why Do I Give a Fuck? A cross-cultural conversation between myself, Diane Tate,
and Johanna Thompson. In these times of great struggle and possible shift, we ask ourselves,
why do we give a fuck about any of it? How does the lens we see the world through impact what we see?
And what do we do about it? What do we do about it?
I don't know. What do we do about it?
What do we do about it?
No.
There's so much to talk about. What do we do about what's going on? And today is one of those days that has like levels and layers of complexity. So I'm glad that we're able to have this conversation with each other.
Yeah. It's good to see you, my friend, as always. On this Indigenous Peoples Day here in the U.S., on U.S. territory. Not officially anymore, and we'll talk about that a bit, but this is one of those benchmarks for me, I think, that like tells me who I'm talking to. If they're celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day, then down with them. If they're celebrating Columbus Day, I got some side eye, I got some questions. I want to know a little bit more about that. This is more and more of those little benchmarks are showing up for me where it's pretty easy to determine who I'm talking to based on what they support. So
yeah, and what their knowledge base is. And then there's also, like, as we're talking about Indigenous Peoples Day or versus Columbus Day, there is some like legislative action that is a part of the way that this new government is handling the things that the U.S. citizens have said are important for them to honor and to think about. And so we're talking about during the Biden administration, Indigenous Peoples Day was recognized as a federal holiday in 2021. And then on October 11th, Donald Trump kind of rescinded that and made Columbus Day the official day here, which then speaks to this manifest destiny understanding about U.S. territory being developed on a land where there were a significant amount of Indigenous people all across North America that were genocided in the same way that we're seeing genocides happen currently in our present day. This genocide happened at the creation of U.S. territory.
Yeah. This is the day that I wear. I'm gonna put my camera down a little bit so you can see the shirt that I'm wearing.
Let's see it.
Well, I wear this every year, and you can read it for the folks that might be listening.
Okay, I'm happy to read it. So Columbus is a murderer, thief, rapist, pedophile, assassin, genocidal monster, serial killer. So that's really telling the true story of the impact of Columbus's journeys on his way to Asia, finding himself in the Caribbean and then landing in North America and claiming for the crown that this land as land that's available to come and destroy those who are already on it.
And, when we were just about to start recording, I was reflecting that, when I was growing up in schools in North Carolina, segregated, very white dominant, small town in North Carolina, I remember being taught about Columbus. I remember being taught that he was this hero, that he discovered this amazing land. And then it's interesting because I don't remember. I remember at the time we were taught they were called Indians. So that's the term I'll use, even though I know that's not a term we use now. Although there are different places where I do see Indigenous folks using that term. So, but that's the term we were taught to call them, that they were Indians. And I remember hearing about and learning about in school that they were, the term the savages, and that they were this aggressive band of humans that Columbus and his colonizers had to thwart and beat and win. And it's so interesting to me now, thinking back to that it never occurred to my little white mind that these folks lived here before they came. And so therefore it wasn't discovered. It was already existing, and he came and took it. And words, I'm learning more and more that words are just so powerful and so important. And so, yeah, I was just reflecting on that when I was thinking about how I was taught about Columbus and how I was taught about who he was and what he represented and what he stood for. But we know that, narrative is key, and whoever can write the story is usually the person that had the most power in the situation. So, do you remember being taught that kind of stuff when you were in school?
Absolutely. I mean, I was raised in the same U.S. educational system. So the same narratives about this, wonderful explorer. It doesn't even speak about who was on the ships and helping to navigate in the spaces, because most of the nautical navigation actually came from sailors that came out of Asia and Africa who had been going through the trade for a very long time. So, and any of those people who were helping to navigate the ships are never, ever mentioned or named. And I found that out not as a young person, as a student. I found that out as a parent who wanted to make sure that my young people were expanding their understanding of how U.S. territory was developed. So I didn't come into that knowledge as, like that question of, however old you were when you found out this thing. And as we're getting more access through technology to having more information and changing our positionality, like being a student versus being a parent who is really interested in making sure that their young people have a very clear understanding of the narrative storytelling that they're receiving when they were in school. Because again, I'm one of the people that for my second child, removed my second child out of the educational system in a traditional way, because I recognize the detriment and harm to my first child, and so I wanted to make sure that I didn't repeat the same mistakes twice. But there are a number of young people today, speaking about the educational system, that are not in school today. And I'm really curious as to what they were told as to the reason that they're not in school. I know that on a federal governmental level, it would be to honor Columbus Day. And I'm hoping that the conversations in the home tell a more expanded story of who existed and how they existed on this land before U.S. territory was developed out. So,
yeah. And, something that's happening in the world right now on U.S. territory that I wanted to speak into on this Indigenous Peoples Day is that a typhoon, I don't know exactly how many days ago, but it was maybe within the past 5 days, a typhoon hit the western coast of Alaska, which we know is one of the 50 states in the U.S., but it's also a territory that was taken from an indigenous population, the Alaskan Indigenous peoples, and the typhoon has greatly impacted. From what I'm learning, I'm just hearing about this morning, that the typhoon that has created an immense amount of flooding, and that there are indigenous communities that are being washed away. Entire houses with families inside are being washed away. And on being in the U.S., being on U.S. territory, nobody's talking about it. And I stumbled across it today on my algorithms, thank goodness, and wanted to speak into that because for those of us who are listening, those of you who are listening to us that might be on U.S. territory in the what we call the United States of America, as you can see, if you're watching us, my name says Occupied Turtle Island because Turtle Island was what this landmass was called before it was stolen by my ancestors, and I wanted to speak into this because these are indigenous folks. We think about Native Americans, and we think about the Native Americans, the First Nations peoples that are across the greater landmass of the United States. But we have also indigenous folks that are in Alaska that would be indigenous to that land. We also have indigenous folks that are native to Hawaii, which is another land that the U.S. colonized. And we have indigenous folks in Puerto Rico that is another land that the U.S. colonized. So wanted to speak into these folks that are dealing with this horrible tragedy. And just, if you don't know about this happening, please, search, go into whatever search engine you use and look for Alaska communities being impacted by this typhoon. And I've just put, for those of you who are watching, I just put those of you who are watching can see it. There's a URL on there to donate to the Alaskan families to help them rebuild. But for those of you who are listening, I'm also going to put this URL in the notes for the show so that you can go and donate and try to give what you can. But this is all happening right now in real time. Buses are floating down rivers, and it's just horrible. So,
and that does make me think beyond U.S. territory and indigeneity, and what happens when there is kind of this environmental injustice that's occurring, because we know that we are utilizing all of the resources, all of the natural resources. And when we utilize these natural resources and we have environmental impacts, we have typhoons, and we have the indigenous people in various lands all over the place being impacted. The thing that's so critical about this, to your point, is that the knowledge, this is not something that folks are speaking about on the news.
Right.
And that's also a voice across the globe. Indigenous people's voices have been really suppressed. So, and we know that when we take care of the least of us, the most of us have a more expanded experience. So hearing about this and thinking about Indigenous people, the reason why we have an Indigenous Day, an Indigenous Peoples Day, is not only to tell the narrative story in a different way than what we've been taught, but also to provide an opportunity for voices that are typically unheard to be unheard, for us to be in consideration of Indigenous populations across the globe who need support, who need to be recognized, and who need to be valued for the level of wisdom that comes through. Because what we have to remember and understand is that Indigenous people know how to work the lands because they were the original people on the lands. They were the first folks to negotiate the environment so that humans could survive and thrive in those spaces. And so we're not looking to some of the technologies that Indigenous people use to maintain and cultivate the land so that we can enjoy it in this moment today, then there's going to be a lot of internal knowledge that we're going to lose that is helpful and necessary for us to be able to maintain and survive today. So it's really critical, not only just to have narrative storytelling, but to be amplifying the voices of people that are least heard.
Yeah. Currently. One of the phrases that I heard that really impacted me, you were just speaking to this about how Indigenous people tend to, they have all of this wisdom about how to work the land and how to grow food. And we know that when my ancestors came over to this land and colonized it, we took that knowledge from the Indigenous folks because we didn't know how to do it. We didn't know how to grow food that was going to grow here. This was a different climate. It was different soil. It was different, all the things. And so what we knew from the land that we came from, we came here and it didn't work. So we stole the wisdom of the Indigenous who were, oftentimes willing to give it to be helpful, and stole it, and that's how we survived, and then stole all the rest of the land from there. But the thing that came to my mind when you were speaking was the difference between Indigenous folks who think of not owning the land but being of the land, versus colonizers' mindset. And we talked a little bit about this several episodes ago. We were talking about what was happening in Gaza, and when you find yourself in a dialogue with someone who says that Israel is indigenous, the people of Israel are indigenous to the land, the first argument is, do Indigenous people mow down the trees? Do they destroy the land the way the Israelis have destroyed the land in Gaza? And the answer is always no. So I just wanted to say that out loud too, because I feel like in this day and time when people that descend and have a colonizer mentality tend to like to claim a narrative or a moniker or a what's the word I'm searching for, being part of a group that they're not part of, that they're actually decimating to steal from. And so that's like rule number one. If you're having a conversation with somebody who's trying to tell you that somebody who is a colonizer is actually indigenous, it's like, no. How do they treat the land?
Context is, yeah, man.
The land. Let's just ask that.
I love that. And I want to run back what you said for the people in the back to hear it. There's a difference between owning the land and being of the land, right? And being able to negotiate a space of the land has a lot more love and inclusivity and belonging, even if you're not from the land, because your desire and your intention is to make sure that you're cultivating enough resources to continue to have the land be one with you in your survival.
Right.
And so those are the things that we see when there's colonization and there's oppression, and when there's mass genocide and moving people. You do see the land shifting and changing according to how it's being occupied in its present state.
Right. And the understanding that the land is a living, breathing entity that you are, as an Indigenous person, what I'm learning is that they see that as a partner that they collaborate with. They don't own it and try to control it and try to bend it to their will. And we see that time and time and time and time again in the colonizer mindset, that we've got to make this land do what we want it to do. We've got to stop these, we've got to stop it evolving into what it is, instead of rolling with it and seeing the loving things that it brings to us. Yeah, the mindset is just completely different. And so to me, that's maybe step one. If I'm trying to discern who I'm talking to, am I talking to a colonizer or somebody who subscribes to a colonizer mindset? They may not be of a colonizer descendancy, but they, that because we've been taught that for so many centuries, there are many people that might claim themselves as members of indigenous cultures that still propagate the colonizer mindset. So it's something we always have to be unpacking, for sure. So.
That's true. And this brings a curiosity to me as to why it was even necessary to revoke an Indigenous Peoples Day as a national holiday. What, like, people can decide that they're going to follow the narrative of Columbus and do what they do with that. And then people also can be in the expanded awareness of Indigenous Peoples Day. There was no need to rescind it. And that it just speaks to, again, the narrative storytelling that this current administration wants to push forward without the level of inclusivity and belonging of all of the people that exists on U.S. territory. And that's like another form of harm to communities, regardless if they decide to prescribe to being connected with Indigenous people or colonized people in the history of the United States. It's just like that. There's again, here we are limiting an honest narrative storytelling about people's history that are a part of this, what we understand the United States to be, a melting pot of people from all kinds of origins all over the place, even in its initial inception. And it was very, it is not hard for a holiday to be recognized in the United States. And I wanted to segue into the fact that they have designated that Charlie Kirk should have a national holiday, and that will be for tomorrow. Is the day designated for that tomorrow, because it represents.
Well, this is dropping on October 14th. So when you're listening to this, we will be on the day. Yeah. So today.
Yes. Recorded today, dropping tomorrow. And there's going to be this recognition of Charlie Kirk as a national holiday. I know it took a very, very, very long time to have Indigenous Peoples Day to be recognized, and then to be revoked by the current administration, and then almost immediately within a month's time to have another person erected with a national holiday. And just to be able to see where the value of the administration is lying in this point. And I understand that Charlie Kirk's national holiday is really to motivate people to civic engagement. It's really hard for a demographic of people to be motivated into civic engagement when you are completely excluding their involvement in existing within the demographics of the people who live in the United States. There is such an oxymoron. There's such an internal struggle and definitely specific messaging that gives out when you do things like that.
Well, and we saw it before with when after 9/11 happened, and we got the Homeland Security Department within maybe a month or so. I don't remember exactly how long it was, but it felt like just days. I'm sure it was at least weeks. But, the idea that we would get a cabinet level department, you and I, the organization that we met working through, have been working for over 20 years to get a cabinet level Department of Peace. And in just weeks, we were able to get a cabinet level Department of Homeland Security after what happened on 9/11. And so, it's just a reminder that anytime any of our elected officials try to tell us how hard it is to get any of these things done, the podcaster that I don't like saying his name, but the podcaster that was killed in September got a National Day of Remembrance on October 14th, which is his birthday. Also happens to be George Floyd's birthday. So I just wanted to speak that into, because there was a lot of talk about getting a day of remembrance for George Floyd that I believe never happened. But, the National Day of Remembrance for this podcaster happened within weeks of his killing. So, and I've also heard many conversations that lift him up to a level of martyrdom, if you will, that's similar. I mean, comparisons to MLK, which just blows me away.
It stands for Martin Luther King.
Martin Luther King Jr.,
So
yes. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Want to give him all his titles. And I mean, talking about how he brought people together, and so then that it's all about it's a big propaganda machine of whitewashing the podcasters' very hate-filled and hate-mongering rhetoric that he used to spread along the airways when he was alive. And so this is what our government is working so hard to do, is to create a National Day of Memory for really just a big old hate monger. That's all he was,
And as they're making that comparison between the two people is really interesting, because the messaging that came from MLK's work was much more inclusive. It wasn't about division. It wasn't about excluding people. It wasn't about not acknowledging certain social conditions that we had that were existing in the United States. Whereas this other person had a lot of divisive harm that came out of some of the content that he was speaking of. And I wasn't really following or paying that much attention to him because because I wasn't following or paying attention to him.
It makes perfect sense, and I completely understand why I wasn't either. I mean, I'd heard of him, but I wasn't following him. All I knew was that he's
like Columbus, though, and I want to make this point, but like Columbus, this other person, it is a history of the United States to really uphold and glorify these really violent characters, and support a lot of significant violence across the globe. And those are some of the things that we want to be able to highlight, so that people are aware of the ways that this violence is impacting so many people across the globe. And that violence is only glorified where there's value placed, and the value looks a very specific way in the United States in particular.
Yes, the value looks a very specific way, for sure. It's gosh, I mean, we think about all of the statues that were erected of all of the civil rights. I mean, not civil rights, the Civil War. Generals and military people, and some of those are being re-erected. They got torn down during the last administration and taken down, and some of those are being re-erected in certain spaces. The people that the United States glorifies are often violent humans, and we think about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who was really quite reviled when he was killed. It's only, I mean, I've heard that the narrative and the focus of his words and how he moved through space has changed from that he was assassinated to how he is now. and how the violent the people that want to talk about hate. I mean, this podcaster was speaking into transphobic hate when he was shot. And so for anybody who wants to believe the whitewashing about how he was this this human that just only supported love, he was actually speaking into and talking about school shootings and talking about transphobic hate, not speaking into it to raise awareness, but speaking into it to perpetrate it when he was shot. So they're even trying to whitewash that and talk about how he wanted to talk about across the aisle and how he had dialogues with people he didn't agree with and all this stuff. Like,
Yeah,
it's true. It's the gaslighting is just so deep.
and one of the things that I'm curious about is, what do we think the reason is that there is so much emphasis on glorifying these very violent narratives as we are watching the level of violence come into the United States, as we are watching this over criminalization, this over surveilling, this over militarization of United States communities, states, and that's militarized support is actually supposed to go through helping indigenous communities that have a major environmental impact and their homes are flying away. That's when we need to like call in our military and the infrastructures that our military goes if you're going to be supporting U.S. citizens on its territory. And instead, we're using that type of power and we're using that type of resource to over surveil and create fear in our communities rather than the support and the help that we need. And I'm just curious, this is like your thought process about like why is the focus on glorifying violence and utilizing our resources towards more violence against folks who are U.S. citizens?
I mean, the only answer that comes to the top of my head is that this is a violent country, that the U.S. was born out of violence. It was created in violence. It was formulated and built in violence and subjugation and oppression. And that is the origin story of our country. And so every single piece, if I think about this country, I tend to think in pictures. I like metaphors. And so I think of this country as a tapestry, as something that, if you've ever ever watched anybody weave anything on a loom, there are threads going in one direction, and then you loop threads going in and out and in and out and in and out, and it creates a pattern. It creates oftentimes a beautiful picture. But if this country is a tapestry and we think about the threads of racism and violence and hatred and domination and oppression and subjugation that this country was created off, if that is woven into every thread or in between every main thread of the tapestry is inherently flawed. It will never be, and to take the metaphor even further, we like to say that the picture of this country is this beautiful picture, the God bless America and amber waves of grain, and all of the shit that we've been taught all of our lives about this country. But if the threads are poisoned, we talked about whiteness being the cancer, being the poison, then it doesn't matter how pretty the picture is that you weave all the threads together. The threads are they will cause the destruction of. So yeah, I think that's why we have to atone. We have to come to some sort of understanding within our own hearts. And I say we, people that look like me, not anybody that has been subjugated or oppressed by these systems all these years, but those of us who have benefited from it, but also uplifted it, have to get a clue on it and then fight for something different, and really stand 10 stones down. The ceasefire in Gaza has supposedly started. Yay that the bombs
Yeah, man.
as much, but they are still getting bombed. So don't get it twisted. Israel is still killing people, and still subjugating people. So we can't take our eyes off Gaza. I want to say that before we end today's episode. We cannot take our eyes off Gaza because it has not stopped. But we're going to be told that it stopped. We're going to be told that that all of the hostilities have ceased, and that the Palestinian people can return to their homes. Their homes are not there anymore. Nothing is
Nothing
there
to
anymore.
return to.
Pulverized
Some of the most amazing. I've seen some of the most amazing photos, and I'm one of the folks that like I'm an empath. So like, if I haven't been able to access looking at what has been going on in Palestine, knowing prayers up and everything, but after the ceasefire, I went to go and be a part of the joyful celebration. And as soon as I saw, and I'm going to say my people, and I say my people because anybody who is oppressed across the globe is a part of what I consider my people. And I'm not
Yes.
Palestinian, but that is it. And so to see the joy and the like and the relief in hearing about the ceasefire, and I just wept so hard. And then I was seeing other representations of how much loss of life has occurred there, and then thinking about the length of time that this level of violence has gone on. I'm in celebration of the ceasefire, and I'm also in major caution of where there's going to continue to be these type of political exercises to eradicate people and erect something different. And when you talk about a tapestry that exists as a metaphor to what the United States can look like, with that tapestry, if it is woven in with so much harm and violence, then it really is important for us to be thinking about creating a new tapestry and weaving together a new narrative that does incorporate more care and consideration for human life, the value of human life. That my response to seeing some of the things on social media platforms is like, we really need to learn how to value each other's lives as much as our own.
Yes.
And that's the kind of tapestry that we need to be weaving and removing all of these violence. So like, if you are supporting a Columbus Day and the history of the truth of what happened to Indigenous people on this land when Columbus arrived with the fleets and the disease and the pillaging of the communities and people, if that is one of the narratives, then there also should be a narrative of millions of tribes of humans that were working together, that were trading together, that were warring together, that were creating family together, that was using indigenous technology to make sure that the land continued to give forth and to return back some of the resources that we as humans have to the land, as far as the way that we till it and the way that we help it to go within the ecosystem of our existence. All of these things are really critical and important as we celebrate these national holidays and think about where our value statement proposition is going to be for caring for one another as humans.
Yeah, and I think the you just talked about us learning how to love others as we truly love ourselves. And for me, that means right now staying vigilant on knowing the truth of things. And I know we're tired. You know, the Palestinians are tired. Everybody is tired that has been watching and trying desperately to do something different, to raise the alarm, to talk to as many people as they can talk to change minds and hearts and get people focused. But we can't lose that focus. We cannot. We have to almost double it down at this point. And I know the exhaustion is real. So we have to learn how to take care of ourselves and learn how to fill ourselves back up when we can. But we all know this. We all know this story, how this works, right? Something horrific happens, and then supposedly an end to that horrific thing shows up, and then everybody goes back to sleep, and they all go, "Oh, phew, that's over," and they go back to their lives, and some of the deepest harm can happen in that moment. You know, I'm thinking about after the Civil War, during Reconstruction, and then Jim Crow. Some of the deepest harm. Not saying that it was worse than slavery, but so much harm happened. Yeah, I mean that is so. And it was because we stopped paying attention to what needed to happen. So, I just want to encourage everybody that's listening or watching that has been speaking into what's been happening in Palestine to don't stop. Don't stop. It's not the time to. We can rejoice in the fact that the initial bombing has stopped. I am connected to families in Gaza, and I'm communicating with them, and what I'm hearing from them is just unbelievable exhaustion. I mean, to the depths of their bones. And then if they choose to try to return to where they lived previously, many of them wandering around trying to find where their homes used to be because they don't recognize anything, because absolutely everything is pulverized. And so to this really, really, really fine dust, it's not even rubble anymore, it's dust. And some I've seen have actually been able to find their homes, and it's just been an unbelievable relief to know that they're still standing. But many, and the numbers are estimated at maybe 680,000 dead, and we will probably never know how many people have lost, because there are so many of them were trapped under the rubble, and that rubble has all been bulldozed and you know, and taken to its finest level. And so anyway,
and we hear that the calculations that they tell us should be multiplied by 3 all the time.
Way bigger than what they're saying, because they're never going to be able, and that was all part of the plan, right? It was all part of the plan. That's why the Israelis came in with bulldozers after they bombed areas to completely flatten everything, because they knew that there were bodies in that rubble, and they wanted to be able to cover it up so that it just wasn't even recognizable anymore. It's all part of the plan. So anyway,
there's so much that is going to have to be addressed, not only like helping people, but like the health impacts of all of that unhealthy death, all of the health impacts as far as your mental and psychological health and care. There's so much care that's going to need to be given into helping to create community for those folks that are there that have been harmed, both, you know, for anyone who is there on that land, existing still.
So we send love.
We're glad for a ceasefire. We're glad that we have processes that help to get us into towards the direction of where we want to exist. We want the ceasefires. We want to be thinking about the infrastructure of recreating community for the folks that are on the land in Gaza. And we also want to be thinking about paying attention to that as a political project, to what we're actually seeing happening on U.S. territory and in other places around the world, where you have these powers that are coming in and occupying space and land and not being considerate of the indigenous people of those places.
Right. Well, so my friends, another wonderful conversation, and we send all of our love out to everybody in Palestine that is, you know, celebrating the ceasefire and being reunited with their loved ones that have been released from their hostage situation in Israel, in the Israeli prisons. And we will be back together again. So love to the Indigenous folks on the U.S. territories today and all across the world. And
to all of our good relatives out there. Thank you. Blessings. All right.
Thanks for joining us. Until next time, as you move throughout your day, continue to ask yourself,
Why Do I Give a Fuck is produced in collaboration with Johanna and Diane. Music by Norwegian musician Water. See you next time.